In this video, we'll be learning about data and association. Before we begin, make sure you have this page either printed or pulled up on your screen. So one way to display data is called a scatter plot, and we'll look at an example here after I go over this information. But scatter plots are graphs that use points, and these points display numerical data. So any type of number-based data that has two variables. A very fancy way to say two variables is something called bivariate, where that prefix bi means two and then variate meaning just variables. Scatter plots can help determine if one variable has an effect on the other. What that means is, are there any overall trends happening? Are there patterns? Or what we're going to focus on is there any association between variables? So again, kind of a easier way to explain that would be, is there any relationship happening between the two things going on? And we'll look at an example here next. This is an example of a scatter plot. So you can see there's different points going on, and let's dive into what those points mean. So the problem says Susie went to the mall and surveyed shoppers to see how many items they purchased. So how many items would be our first variable, and then the total amount of money that they spent. And then she put that information in a scatter plot. So we can see that there's that total money spent, and here's the number of items. So that's why it's bivariate data, because there's two things happening. So what's nice about a scatter plot is that one point tells you two different pieces of information. So let's look at this lowest one here. That point tells me that this person bought one item, because it's on that one X coordinate there, and then they spent $40. Whereas this top point here would tell us that they bought 10 items and spent a total of around $190. So scatter plots, each point tells you two specific things, which is pretty nice. Okay, so let's look at the questions they're asking. The first says, how many shoppers did Susie survey? Well, this would relate to the total number of points on the graph. So what we would have to do is kind of count up the points. So let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So that would be 16 total shoppers. And if we looked at each point, that would tell us the specifics about each shopper, meaning how many items they bought, how much total money they spent. Part B says, does the number of items purchased seem to have an effect on the amount of money a shopper spent? So what that's asking is there any sort of relationship between the number of items you buy and how much money you spend? And if we look at this graph, we can see that it's kind of all going upwards, meaning the more items you buy, the more money that you spend. So more items leads to more money. And that makes sense. If you and a friend were buying the same thing and you bought 20 of them and your friend only bought one, you're going to be spending more money. So that relationship here would be this: more items equal more money. So what this video is going to do is attempt to describe this type of association that you can see in different scatter plots. So there's three main types of association that data can have. And the first would be positive association. So positive association is when two variables move together. So what that means is, as one variable increases, the other variable increases. And that's like the shopping example that we just saw. As you buy more items, your cost is also going to be getting higher. So as one increases, the other increases. It moves together. On this graph, even though it's kind of spread out, you can see that it's all trending in an upwards direction. So that would be positive association. Overall, your graph is moving upwards. With negative association, this means that the variables are moving in opposite directions. So what that means is, as one variable increases, the other is actually decreasing. And we can see here on this graph that, again, it's now moving in a downwards direction. And then finally, your last would be if there's just no association, and that would be if the two things really aren't related at all. So one change in a variable doesn't affect the other. And in this graph, it kind of just looks like a big mess. There's no general upwards trends, there's no general downwards trends, it's just kind of all over the place, and that would be no association. So not only are we going to work on identifying the type of association, we're also going to then describe it further. So there's 3 general ways that you can describe associations. And the first would be linear. And in that word linear, we see line. So if a straight line can be drawn to follow the overall trend, we call that linear. The other type of description would be a strong association, and that looks like if the data points are close together. The closer they are, the stronger that relationship is. And then finally, it could be a weak association, which would be the opposite of a strong association. So that would be when the points are widely spread apart, or just widely spread. So let's look at some examples, and this will be the type of thing that you're going to work on today. I see 3 different graphs here. And the first thing I notice is they're all trending in an upwards direction. So the first way I could describe these is identifying the type of association. So they all have a positive association. But I can see that they're still very different from each other. So even though they're positive, I'd want to give some more descriptions to really distinguish them from each other. So if I look at this first one, I see that the points are all pretty close together. So I would say that has a strong association. And then the other thing I can notice is if I draw a line here, a straight line, those points are pretty close. So I would call that a linear association as well. So I could say this has a strong, linear, positive association. Whereas if I look at the second example, I see that those points are more spread apart. So it's not as strong as that first one. So I could say this has a pretty weak association, but it's still moving all in a general linear fashion. So I'm still going to describe this as a linear association. Finally, if I look at that last one, the points are pretty close, especially like right here in that region. So I'm going to say that's a strong association. However, it's not linear anymore because it starts off going this way, but it doesn't continue in that line. Instead, it kind of swoops upward. So since it's not a straight line, I would call this non-linear. So this right here is the kind of stuff that you're going to be practicing today. So in summary, kind of the goals today would be to first identify the type of association. And when we're saying type, we're saying things like it's positive, negative, or there isn't one. From there, you're then going to work to describe the association. So you could say it's strong or it's weak. And you could also say if it's linear or nonlinear. Good luck.